The courtroom was dead silent, the kind of silence that only comes before something monumental. Judge Caprio, an imposing figure of integrity, sat at the bench, his eyes focused on the defendant. But across from him in the plush chair sat the oil tycoon's son, a young man wrapped in arrogance, the embodiment of privilege. His smirk was casual, almost dismissive, as he stared down the judge. "Who do you think you are?" The words dripped from his lips like venom. "You think you can lecture me? I don't answer to you." The audacity hung in the air, a challenge thrown with the confidence of a man who had never faced consequences. The room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the inevitable clash. But what happened next, something no one could have predicted, would shake the very foundations of the courtroom and the public's trust in the system. Judge Caprio was about to make him regret every word. Hit subscribe if you're a Caprio fan and want to see justice served. This wasn't just another courtroom encounter. This was a collision of worlds, a clash between two forces that had long been at odds: privilege and justice, entitlement and fairness. The oil tycoon's son, born with a silver spoon and a sense of invincibility, had never known what it felt like to answer for his actions. He had always been able to buy his way out, maneuvering through life as if rules were made for everyone else. And now, standing in front of Judge Caprio, he thought he could treat the law the same way. Judge Caprio had seen it all before: arrogance, entitlement, and those who believed the world owed them everything. But this was different. This wasn't just any defendant. This was the son of one of the wealthiest, most influential men in the country. Someone who could easily use his father's power to dismantle the very justice system that had served Caprio so well for decades. But Caprio was no ordinary judge. For him, fairness wasn't negotiable. He had spent a lifetime in the courtroom, standing tall against the forces of injustice. It wasn't just his job, it was his mission to make sure no one, not even the rich and powerful, could escape the consequences of their actions. What happened next would send shockwaves through the nation. The courtroom wasn't just watching a trial. It was about to witness a turning point. Judge Caprio was ready to make it clear: no one was above the law. The oil tycoon's son had always been untouchable. From the moment he was born, the world bent to his will. Raised in the lap of luxury, surrounded by wealth that most people could only dream of, he had never known struggle. His family's name was synonymous with power, global influence, multi-billion-dollar deals, and a legacy built on extracting resources from the earth, often at the expense of the very communities that depended on it. And while his father reigned supreme in boardrooms and executive offices, his son was free to live a life of indulgence without consequence or scrutiny. From a young age, he had been taught that his name alone was enough to get him what he wanted. Expensive cars, private jets, designer clothes, nothing was out of reach. He never had to work for anything, never had to prove his worth. Every mistake was swept under the rug, every problem was solved with money. His life was a series of parties, vacations, and endless celebrations. He was the golden boy, adored by his peers and untouchable by the public. But this world, one of wealth and privilege, had come at a cost. It had insulated him from the harsh realities that most people faced. He had never been forced to confront injustice or inequality. His world was one where everything was for sale, and the arrogance that came with it only deepened over the years. He viewed those who didn't share his lifestyle as beneath him, people like Judge Caprio, who spent his life fighting for the very things the young man had always taken for granted. To him, Caprio was nothing more than a relic of a bygone era, a man who clung to outdated notions of fairness and equality. Why should someone like Caprio lecture him? He didn't owe anyone respect, especially not someone who was, in his eyes, just another figurehead in a system built to serve the powerful. After all, his family could change laws, influence politics, and erase the past with a simple press release. But the oil tycoon's son had another, more dangerous flaw, a deep-seated belief that he was invincible, that nothing could touch him, not even the law. He had seen his father brush off scandals, brush aside critics, and come out unscathed time and time again. It was this arrogance, this blind confidence in his family's power that led him to underestimate Judge Caprio. He thought the courtroom was just another place where he could flex his muscles and get away with whatever he wanted. He had no idea that today, in this very courtroom, he was about to meet someone who was untouchable, not because of money, but because of integrity. And in that moment, his bubble of invincibility would burst. What he didn't know was that Judge Caprio had faced far worse than him, people with far more power, far more wealth, and every time he had made sure they faced justice. What the oil tycoon's son didn't understand was that the true measure of power wasn't in the wealth you held, but in the courage you had to face what was right. Judge Caprio's story was not one of inherited wealth or privilege. It was a story shaped by struggle, sacrifice, and a deep-rooted belief in the power of justice. Born into a working-class family, Caprio had grown up in a neighborhood where money was scarce, but integrity was abundant. His parents, immigrants who had come to America with little more than hope and determination, taught him early on that success wasn't measured by material wealth, but by the impact you made on others' lives. His father worked long hours in a factory, his hands weathered from labor, while his mother, a seamstress, mended the clothes of the community. They lived modestly, but every evening they sat together at the dinner table, sharing stories about the importance of honesty, hard work, and respect. These values were ingrained in Caprio from a young age, and he carried them with him as he navigated the challenges of growing up in a world that often seemed stacked against him. He excelled in school, not because he was naturally gifted, but because he worked harder than anyone else. Every late night spent studying, every page turned in a textbook, was a small rebellion against the odds stacked against him. When he entered law school, he faced the same hurdles: financial struggles, doubt from peers who believed he didn't belong, and the pressure to prove himself in a world where the elite dominated the halls of power. But Caprio had something they didn't: an unshakable belief in fairness. Graduating with honors, Caprio was determined to make a difference. He knew that the law wasn't just a set of rules, it was a living, breathing entity, a system meant to uphold the dignity of every person, regardless of their background or status. He didn't go into law for prestige or wealth. He went into it to fight for people who had no voice, for those who were often ignored or dismissed by a society that favored the powerful. Becoming a judge was a natural next step, but it wasn't easy. He had to prove himself time and time again to both his colleagues and the public. He earned his place not by playing the game of power, but by standing firm in his beliefs. Over the years, Caprio earned a reputation as a man of unwavering integrity, known for making decisions based on principle, not pressure. His courtroom was a place where justice was blind to wealth, status, or connections. No one got special treatment. To Caprio, the law wasn't something to be manipulated. It was something to be respected. He saw the law as a shield for the vulnerable and a sword for the righteous. His rulings were not swayed by the rich or powerful, no matter how much influence they held. Judge Caprio's rise to the bench was not about climbing a ladder of power. It was about making sure the ladder remained accessible to everyone. He understood that the system was broken, but he refused to let that break him. In every case he presided over, Caprio saw the faces of people like his parents, hardworking, honest, and striving for something better. And when the oil tycoon's son entered his courtroom, he saw someone who was everything he had fought against. A person who believed that power and wealth could shield them from accountability. But Caprio was more than prepared for this moment. He had faced the powerful before, people who thought they were untouchable, and he had stood his ground. Today, it wouldn't be different. The young man in front of him might have wealth, but Judge Caprio had something far more valuable. The unwavering belief that the law was for everyone, not just the privileged few. And in this courtroom, that belief was going to be tested. The tension in the courtroom thickened with every passing second. The oil tycoon's son, growing more agitated by the second, leaned forward in his chair, his voice rising with every word. "You think you can teach me a lesson, Caprio?" He sneered, a venomous edge to his tone. "What are you going to do, huh? Take away my privilege? My family's influence? You're nothing compared to us." Judge Caprio remained calm, his eyes steady, his hands resting on the bench. He had faced worse than this. Men like this young man, arrogant, entitled, convinced they were above reproach. But there was something different about today, something deeper. The son's insults grew more personal, more biting. "You don't know who I am," he continued, a cruel smile spreading across his face. "You're just a judge, a small-time player in a world where people like me, people with power, run the show. You'll never change that." Caprio's silence spoke volumes. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath, every eye focused on the two figures locked in this escalating battle of wills. The son's anger was palpable, while Caprio's composure only seemed to fuel the tension further. It was clear now. The oil tycoon's son wasn't just challenging the judge's authority. He was challenging the very system that Caprio represented. And as the words flew back and forth, Caprio knew one thing for certain. This wasn't just a case. It was a battle for something much larger, the belief that no one, no matter how powerful, was above the law. And then Caprio finally spoke, calmly, yet with a strength that would silence the room. The courtroom was a pressure cooker, the tension so thick you could almost feel it in the air. The oil tycoon's son had gone too far. His words had started as insults, but now they were outright threats. His arrogance hung like a dark cloud, filling every corner of the room. But Judge Caprio didn't flinch. He was still sitting there, his posture as unyielding as the justice he stood for. His silence had become a force in itself, his calm demeanor in the face of such brazen disrespect almost suffocating in its power. The young man's voice rose, laced with venom. "You've made a mistake, Caprio. You don't understand who I am, what my family controls. I can make your life miserable in ways you can't even imagine. You think you're immune? Think again." Judge Caprio took a slow breath, his eyes never leaving the young man. The crowd was on edge, waiting for the inevitable clash. They expected the judge to snap back, to show his anger, to finally unleash on the spoiled heir sitting across from him. But Caprio did nothing. He simply remained silent, every second stretching the tension even further. Then, without warning, Caprio spoke. His voice was soft, measured, but it cut through the room like a blade. "You're right about one thing," he said. "I don't know who you are, but I do know this. You have no idea who I am." The young man scoffed, dismissing the judge's words. "I know exactly who you are. You're a nobody. Just some man in a robe who thinks he can lecture people like me." Caprio stood, his movements deliberate and calm. The young man's eyes narrowed, but Caprio didn't care. He knew exactly how to play this. "I'm not here to lecture you," Caprio continued, his voice gaining strength. "I'm here to remind you of something that, for all your wealth and privilege, you've clearly forgotten." The oil tycoon's son opened his mouth to speak, but Caprio raised a hand, silencing him. "Let me make something clear," Caprio said, his eyes locking on to the young man with an intensity that silenced the entire room. "You think your wealth and your father's influence make you untouchable. But let me tell you, young man, there's one thing that money can't buy, and that's respect." The words hung in the air, the room silent as every eye in the courtroom turned to the judge. The young man, for the first time, seemed to falter. His confidence wavered as Caprio's words sank in. Caprio continued, his voice steady but full of resolve. You've spent your entire life believing that your father's fortune could shield you from the consequences of your actions. But let me be clear, there's no amount of money in this world that can buy your way out of what's coming for you. The crowd shifted, murmurs rippling through the courtroom, but Caprio wasn't done. He leaned forward, his gaze never leaving the young man's face. You think you can walk into this courtroom and disrespect me, disrespect the law because of who you are? Well, here's the truth. People like you may run businesses, but people like me, we run justice. And justice doesn't bow to anyone, not even the mighty sons of oil tycoons. Caprio's words were deliberate, each one landing with the weight of a hammer on an anvil. The room held its breath, the tension so thick it could have been cut with a knife. The young man, once so full of bravado, now looked uncertain, his smirk slowly fading. Caprio stood tall, the full force of his presence filling the room. You've spent your whole life thinking you were above the law. Today you'll learn otherwise. For a moment, the room was still. Then, as if on cue, the courtroom erupted into applause. It was not just the sound of approval, but the sound of justice, righteous, unwavering, and undeniable, being served. The young man's expression twisted from anger to disbelief, but it was too late. Judge Caprio had spoken the truth, and the truth had silenced him. The tide had turned, and everyone knew it. Caprio had done what no one else could. He had stood firm in the face of privilege and arrogance, and he had shown the world that no one, no matter their wealth or power, was above the law. The moment Judge Caprio had spoken, the courtroom had erupted, not just in applause, but in a wave of energy that rippled far beyond the walls of the courthouse. The oil tycoon's son, his smug confidence shattered, stood frozen in disbelief as the audience's cheers washed over him. His world, one built on wealth and influence, had come crumbling down in front of his eyes. But the shockwaves didn't end there. In the hours that followed, the story spread like wildfire. News outlets across the country picked up the footage, and what had started as a courtroom battle quickly morphed into a viral sensation. The hashtag Caprio takes down privilege was trending within minutes, a symbol of the public's overwhelming support for the judge's stand against entitlement. On social media, millions of people began to share the video, reacting with outrage, disbelief, and awe. Finally, someone stood up to these rich kids who think they can get away with anything, one tweet read. Another posted, "Judge Caprio for president, he's the hero we need." Memes flooded the internet, some of them poking fun at the young man's sudden downfall, others celebrating Caprio's unwavering commitment to justice. But it wasn't just the public that took notice. Celebrities, politicians, and commentators all weighed in. Progressive leaders from across the political spectrum praised Caprio's courage, calling his actions a powerful reminder that the law must serve everyone equally, regardless of their status. "This is what real justice looks like," one senator tweeted, sharing the courtroom clip. Even members of the legal community spoke out, applauding Caprio's poise and integrity. A prominent civil rights lawyer stated, "What Judge Caprio did today is a textbook example of how the law should function. Justice is blind to wealth and power." The ripple effect was undeniable. What had started as a single moment in a courtroom had turned into a nationwide conversation about privilege, power, and the rule of law. And for the oil tycoon's son, it was the beginning of a much different story, one where his name would forever be linked to disgrace, not dominance. The court's verdict was far from the last word in this battle. The conversation had just begun. As the media storm continued to swirl, Judge Caprio remained unshaken. For him, this wasn't about personal glory or the fleeting satisfaction of a viral moment. It was about something much deeper, something far more enduring. This was about justice, real justice, the kind that doesn't bow to power or wealth, but stands firm in the face of corruption and arrogance. In the weeks that followed, the courtroom encounter became a defining moment in the national conversation about privilege, accountability, and the law. Caprio's words echoed in the hearts of millions. There's no amount of money in this world that can buy your way out of what's coming for you. For so long, the system had been tilted in favor of the powerful. For so long, the rich had thought they could escape the consequences of their actions. But Judge Caprio had reminded everyone, no one was above the law. The moral was clear. Integrity, honor, and justice were the true measures of power, not wealth or influence. Caprio had proved that the law was not a tool to protect the privileged. It was a tool to hold them accountable. It was a message to every person who had ever felt powerless, every immigrant, every working-class citizen. You matter. Your voice matters. The law is for you too. And in the end, it wasn't just Caprio who had won. It was the collective triumph of every individual who believed in fairness, equality, and the enduring power of justice. Judge Caprio had not just taken down one arrogant young man. He had shown the world that dignity, truth, and respect could never be bought or silenced. In the end, Judge Caprio didn't just deliver justice in a courtroom. He delivered a message that resonated across the nation. No one is above the law. The oil tycoon's son may have thought his wealth and privilege could protect him, but Caprio proved that integrity and respect for the law are the true forces that shape our society. It wasn't just a win for Caprio. It was a win for every person who believes in fairness, equality, and the power of standing up for what's right. This story isn't just about one courtroom clash. It's about a movement, a reminder that justice should never be for the few. It should belong to everyone. The fight for fairness doesn't end here. It continues with each of us. If you believe in the power of justice, if you stand for dignity and integrity, hit subscribe and join us in this movement. Share this video and be part of the conversation. Together, we can make sure that every voice, every person, no matter their status, has their day in court. We are the change we seek. Judge Caprio's victory was just the beginning. Let's keep the momentum going.